Hello and welcome to the Power of Our Story. My name is Patrick McCurdy. I'm a retired law enforcement after 32 years. I come from a family of law enforcement, and I also now am a public safety advocate for first responder wellness, and I work for Shift Wellness and the Counseling Team International as well. And I'm excited today to have the founder of First Responder Wellness and Shift Wellness, Dr. Stephen Odom, who is my boss and the person who is so gracious enough to hire me into this awesome job that I love so much. This is the Power of Our Story, and it's a place where like-minded people gather. Most of us are former military or connected to military. First responders are connected to that. But not all. All of us have a big heart for service and recovery and for learning and growth, and that's why we collect here together. So, Dr. Odom, I'm so glad to have you here. And I know I get the opportunity, and opportunities probably doesn't do it justice. I get the honor of traveling with Dr. Odom often and teaching in different locations. And I know that his heart and passion will show through. But also, there are a lot of resources online where you can look for Dr. Odom at firstresponder-wellness.com. And there are others as well. If you're interested, just look me up on LinkedIn. Also, afterwards, if you see this video and you have questions about your own recovery from post-traumatic stress or addiction or something, if you're a first responder looking for help, or if you're in the military looking for help, though we don't necessarily cater directly to the military, you can reach out to me and I'd be happy to answer your questions that we have. So, Dr. Odom, this is an unusual space. A few years ago, many years ago, when I got hired in law enforcement, there was no such thing as first responder wellness. In fact, that word wellness was something that we all pushed away and shied away from, something that we tried to avoid. It sounded too foreign to us. And then things like being vulnerable and asking for help and treatment are all things that I was brought up being told are bad. But now, 32 years later, here we are. And I realized from my own shortcomings and failures and difficulties in life that if I had those things in place, my life would probably be a little bit different. But I also know I'm really grateful they happened to me, the bad things, because it put me where I'm at working for you. And so how did you end up? First of all, tell us a little bit about yourself and your family, and then tell us how you ended up in this unique space that's now just really blowing up all around the country and the world.
Sure. Hi, Patrick. It's always really good to see you and everybody else. It's also my honor and privilege that I get to work with Patrick, by the way. Patrick is really, really good at what he does. So I think, together we're a pretty dynamic duo. So I'm excited when we get to work together. I guess I'll just kind of go back to the beginning and bring you up to speed. So I'm a healthcare guy. I've been one for about 30-something years, longer than maybe I care to say at this point, but primarily in large not-for-profit hospital systems. So big, like 850-bed centers that have 50 lock psych beds, chemical dependency beds. I started off in the southeastern U.S. I was in Birmingham first, and then I was in Atlanta and Chattanooga and Orlando. Made my way out to the Bay Area for graduate school and landed in a big organization there. I really enjoyed my experience. I got to see all kinds of different people, but this was in the 90s. And one day I kind of looked up around at our treatment population, realized we had a lot of nurses in treatment. And it was a little unusual to see a nurse as a patient and not as a colleague. Turns out California had passed a diversion law, and a lot of nurses were taking other people's medication. You're not supposed to do that. And so after they were arrested, part of the sentencing was if they went to treatment and we monitored their license for about 5 years, they could get their license back. And so we became this place where a lot of nurses showed up. And I don't know if any of you know nurses or love nurses, but there's a few things about nurses. One is they never know how to not be nurses. They're kind of 24/7, 365. And then put them in a treatment program, and you ask a nurse how she's feeling, and a nurse will say, well, I'm feeling fine, but you should check that guy's blood pressure. It looks high. It's like, you need to stop being the nurse. You need to be the patient. And she had a real hard time doing that. You'd say, let's take a look at the treatment plan. And she might say, well, I wrote a nursing care plan that's better than your treatment plan. Let's work from that. It's like, please stop. You're just getting annoying now. At one point, I threw my hands up and I said, I think we should take all these nurses and put them in a room, and whoever comes out alive is the one we're going to treat. because the nurses are also pretty snippy at each other. They say nurses eat their young, which is probably true. At the same time, the light bulb went off, and I thought, you know what? I think I might be onto something here. If we have people that we come from the same background, work in the same field, see the same things, kind of have the similar attitudes, maybe that's a special group that should be doing treatment together. Because when they were around civilians or other patients, they can't be nurses. I mean, excuse me, they can't be patients, they can only be nurses. And so we started a nurses only treatment program. It worked really well. About 2 years into that, administration came and said, well, that looked like a really good idea. Let's do that with doctors. And so why don't you start a doctor's program? And so I took the bait, which wasn't necessarily the right thing to do, because doctors are not exactly fun to work with. Sometimes there's a little bit of narcissism. They tend to want to be the last one with the last word. They tend to want to know where all the research is. I actually had a month and a half of, I would say, hell, where I had a neurosurgeon and a heart surgeon in treatment at the same time. Every morning they argued over who's more important to human life. So really the problem is you both have an alcohol issue. Let's work on that instead. I was loving it. Life was good. And then one morning my wife walked in holding our fifth child under the arms, who was about 4 months old, and said, you promised we would move down where my parents live when the last one was born. And I said, I don't remember that conversation. And so 3 months later, we moved to Southern California, because that's how that works. I landed at another great hospital, ran all their psych and chemical dependency. About 3 months into that, this little tiny agency called LAPD showed up and asked if we'd start treating officers. And I said, absolutely, we would love to treat your officers. That would be our honor and privilege. And so we started treating officers, but the problem was they were showing up one at a time. And so this officer would come into our program. He or she would come out of the detox and they'd go walk into a group and they say, I'm sorry, but I'm uncomfortable. That looks like a kid I arrested 3 times. I have got nothing in common with him. I'm not talking. It's like, or they'd say, no offense to that lady over there, but she looks like a Newport Beach housewife. I don't have anything in common with her. I'm not talking. And so it was really difficult to get any traction because these people were like one and done. They didn't want to stick around. So I began pushing the hospital. I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to create a first responder program, but they just wasn't the will of the organization at that point. So in 2012, I just kind of took the leap of faith and started my own program. I knew it would take public safety about forever to trust us, and I was willing to do that. So it kind of started as a general population program and gradually bringing first responders in. Ironically, the first 3 patients we had were first responder young adult children. So the kids of first responders, 2 firefighter kids and a cop kid. And so the first responders were there as family members, as parents. And that was really challenging and difficult because they couldn't quite understand and grasp how their kids might have a substance use problem growing up in their family, even though we know it's everywhere. And so this program grew very slowly. And along the way, something just kept making my heart bigger and bigger. And I was trying to figure out what it was. And it kind of all crashed in at one point because we all have to have a why. And for me, it all kind of came to a point of clarity. I went to a retirement party for one of my aunts, and she lived in Denver. By the way, I'm a Colorado kid. I was born in Denver, raised in Fort Collins. And I came to California to study crazy people. That's how I ended up here. So it works really well. It's a big population. But anyway, I went to this retirement party. I was sitting next to my aunt, talking about her career a little bit. And she said, I just wanted you to know, I always knew that you were kind of the ringleader of the cousins. And I also knew that you're the one that named me the Ice Queen. And I said, I'm not sure I want to go any further with this conversation. And I just kind of smiled. And she said, why'd you call me that? And I said, well, it's kind of self-explanatory. She goes, well, you know my job. I said, yeah. She was a pediatric oncologist. And she said, every single day of my life, parents were begging me, yelling at me, screaming, crying, rolling on the floor, trying to bribe me to keep their kids alive. And there wasn't much I could do. I felt like oftentimes I was a grim reaper in a white lab coat, because 1 out of 6 or 7 made it 5 years back then. And I was trying to give them hope, but sometimes it felt a little like false hope. And I remember the feeling of putting a wall between me and everyone else I worked with, all the patients, because I kind of had to protect myself, because if I got into their story, it would dissolve me into tears or make me really upset. And I had to see another patient and another patient and another patient. And so I guess over the course of years, maybe, yeah, I did put this ice wall between me and the world. And I looked at her and I said, well, what would you like to do about that now that you're retired? And she looked at me like she was going to punch me in the face. And then she just started crying. And I was able to get her into some therapy. She did EMDR and some really cool stuff. And it really kind of got her through to the other side. She retired from medicine and she's about 84 today. And she is the volunteer director of nutrition services for the Colorado Public Schools, which is code for she's trying to make them all vegetarians, all the children in Colorado. That's what she's up to. But it just kind of really, everything started to come into focus. And it made me think about my dad. My dad had been an old school, family practice physician in a little tiny town. Half the time, I didn't realize it at the time, but we had two really big freezers in our house and they were always filled with white butcher paper. And it turns out that my dad got paid in cow a lot of times. He didn't get paid in money. And I used to get to carry the bag to house calls. And then I remember when I was about 4.5, my dad seemed to disappear overnight. He was gone. And we'd done a little bit of moving kind of quickly over a year before that, which I kind of remember not real well. And I remember about 4 months after he left, we got a cassette tape in the mail. My mom got excited about it. She pulled it out. She put it in the player. And it was my dad's voice. And my dad was saying, hey, I just want you guys to know I'm safe. I miss you a lot. If you hear any bombs going off, don't worry, I'm safe. I'm sitting in a bunker. I'm over here in Vietnam. They asked me to come over and help people who got hurt while they were here. My dad had been drafted at the age of 32 to Vietnam, which I didn't realize they drafted people that old, but they did for physicians. So he served a combat tour and was a combat surgeon. And then when he came back to our little town, he looked around and he saw all these guys and girls walking around in camo jackets and long hair. And some of them had drug habits. And he thought, I know what's wrong. I know how this happened. I think I can help. And so he was able to talk David Smith, who founded the Haight-Ashbury clinics, into coming and living in our house for about a month and a half. Taught my dad how to do heroin detox a long, long time ago. So that was a reason. And then it made me think, I always liked my dad, but his brother was way cooler than he was, because his brother had gone to West Point. His brother became a 3-star general. His brother, Uncle Bill, was the director of the NSA for about 7 years. So my uncle was the top spy in the whole world, which is cool. But he's a very boring guy. You'd see him at a family reunion. Hey, how's the weather, Uncle Bill? And he'd say, I'm sorry, that's classified. We're not talking about that. And he also had a son, an only child, nice guy, but I was the older cousin. And so I had to basically have a fight with him every summer in Tennessee under the pine trees. We had to leave a little blood there for, the pine trees to grow and me to prove I was the dominant cousin. And then my cousin grew up and became the regimental commander of the Rangers. And so at this point, I don't make eye contact with him. I'm a little afraid of him. I'm afraid he might disappear me if I said the wrong things. And then I looked around. It's like, wait a minute. I have a stepbrother who's a DEA agent. I have 3 cops in the family. I had one of the first female patrol officers in Philadelphia. And I remember her, she was a mother-in-law. And I remember her telling me the story that she quit about 9 years in because she went on her, I think it was like her 12th pediatric death notification. And after she told that family and that family dissolved into tears, she just walked away and said, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this to people. And so she went off and did some other things for the rest of her life, although she did marry a Navy man. And so it kind of all stayed in the family. I got 3 firefighters in the family. I got a bunch of doctors and teachers. One of my cousins was an administrator at Columbine when that happened. And I never really thought twice about it because we're just a family that takes care of the whole world and we don't think about it. But what I did notice is that when my family members retired, they all seemed to die or disappear. So my father died after 2 years of retirement, no heart disease, drop dead heart attack. My uncle, the general, did the same thing. He had a drop dead heart attack about 4 years in. My cousins have kind of retired and disappeared. Like they only talk through their family members. They don't really get involved in anything. They kind of have that 1,000-yard stare one way or another. And so as we built this first responder program, I began to understand exactly what I was doing. In many ways, I was helping to save my own family. But I also felt like this is a population that's really misunderstood. And like Patrick said at the beginning, 32 years ago, wellness was not a thing at all. And I think what we all forget is that, especially in public safety and in the military too, you guys have a very challenging and fraught relationship with psychology, because every single one of you had to go see a psychologist to get your job. and you had to pass a fitness for duty type test or something that was a psychological evaluation that said, yes, you're okay. And there's kind of a hidden message in there that is, from this moment forward, you can never not be okay. Because if you're not okay, we're going to give you a fitness for duty and we're going to take you out and you're going to lose your badge, you're going to lose your gun. And so now when we talk about wellness and we talk about you getting help for yourself, it's like, that doesn't sound right, because I know what could happen. And so this whole movement towards wellness has been really challenging in a lot of ways, because we have to create new pathways inside public safety that allow people to know that there's a wellness path and that there's a discipline path, and they're not the same thing. That what we've learned over time is, like Patrick said, 32 years later, if you store that stuff up for 32 years, it's not actually going away. It's going to come out. But is it going to come out in your body, in something with your heart, or something with an aneurysm, or something with a cancer, or something physical, or is it going to come out emotionally, or is it going to come out both ways? And, you guys probably all know the book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And that's really just kind of almost like, that's the beginning and the end of what we really need to understand. And so we know now what we didn't know then, which is, if you process trauma and the events and the things that you see along the way, then that's the path to keeping your brain and your body healthy over the course of a career, because you never know when you put yourself over the line and you can't come back from it. I think the other thing that's really been fascinating is, when you talk trauma with responders, you have to be really careful, because it can't be about the stuff, because everybody's seen a lot of stuff. But the brain has a pretty magical way of learning to desensitize you to all that, so that you can, distance yourself. Like I said, put up the ice wall between you and other people and just do the thing you need to do. So we can't talk about quantity, because technically the average first responder has 188 traumatic events over the course of a career. So we really have to categorize what trauma really is. And trauma is really just two things for first responders. It's basically what we call moral injury. And moral injury is when I see what people do to other people and it should never be allowed. That pisses me off and it breaks my heart a little bit. And how many of those do you need? It can be pretty poignant, and you learn to shut it down, but it doesn't take too many. And then the other area of trauma, believe it or not, is about decisions, because responders make decisions every day. And the decisions you make are life and death for other people oftentimes. And sometimes you make the right decision, but some good person doesn't make it, or something bad happens and it was never intended. Now, when bad things happen to bad guys, no problem. We're okay with that. But when bad things happen to good people, that really bothers us. It kind of takes me to a story of a guy who's happy for us to talk about it. He was a LA County fire captain, and he got called to a vehicle in flames in center lanes on the 405 at 5 p.m. It was a parking lot. You couldn't get into it. 4 people in the car. Couldn't really get the hoses through very well. By the time he got there, everyone was around the vehicle, had jumped out of their cars, screaming, "Save the people, save the people." But immediately behind the car was an oil tanker truck, and it had caught on fire. And so he had to make a decision. What am I going to do here? Am I going to do something cosmetic and make it look like I'm trying to save these people who are already too far gone? Or am I going to protect the tanker truck to keep it from exploding and taking out how many more people? I don't know. And so he did the right thing. He took care of the tanker truck, put out the fire. The people in the car didn't make it. That felt like a decent decision. He was okay with it. Now it's like 3 years after retirement. And the thing that wakes him up in the night is not those people in the car. It's all the people around screaming at him. Why don't you save those people? Why don't you save those people? What's wrong with you? That's what bothered him for the rest of his life, because he made a good decision, but that's the price he paid. And so if we think about that, then it's a lot easier to narrow down what causes difficulties for us. And then plus the fact that it's kind of this relentless around the clock presence that we have to have. And we're not really ever getting to calm down, because we go back the next day, and we go back the next day, and then we go back the next day. And when you pull the military folks into it, especially in public safety, there's so many people who've already had a military career, and now they come into public safety, and they're almost preloaded, for stuff. In a way, they're already pretty good at desensitizing. But in a way, is that a good thing or not a good thing? I'm not really sure sometimes. We need to understand that when bad things happen, you got about a 30, 45-day window to process it, bleed it off, talk it out, whether that's with a chaplain, whether that's with a therapist, whether that's with a peer supporter. It can be with just about anybody who knows how to help with that. But if you lock it down and don't talk about it, it's going to come back later. And our treatment center is filled with people who are coming back later. You know, we have people in our treatment center now. By the way, our treatment center only treats first responders. It's got about 70 people in it today. They're from all over the country and from Canada. You know, and they come in different cohorts. We've got the retirees who come in, and they're actually the most pissed off because they crossed the line. They did everything right, you know, and it was a lot of them, it wasn't bothering them much during the career. It's kind of after the career. And we know that that's because things get quiet. You know, as long as you're busy, you're okay. When you're not busy, that's when things start to percolate a little bit more than you want them to. We got mid-career folks, and they're confused because some of them came up through the ranks behind people who said, suck it up, buttercup, rub some dirt on it and get back out there and don't worry about it. But some are saying, I'm not sure that's the best way. And so they're kind of torn and conflicted. And then a lot of them mid-career folks, you guys probably know this too, is that everybody has what we call golden handcuffs in public safety. And that's that idea that I might have 5 or 6 or 7 more years to go. I'm really tired of this. I don't want to do it anymore, but I can't stop because there's a retirement rainbow that I got to get to, that pot of gold that I've been working for my whole career. I'm tired of this, but I can't stop. And so that's kind of a danger zone, because what does that do with how I approach calls and my job itself? And what does that do to my situational officer awareness and all those kinds of things? And we actually know that the highest rate of completed suicide is 5 years up to the retirement age. It's not after retirement. So that's really the danger zone. So another question is, what are we doing for pre-retirement when it comes to the wellness side of things? Because in retirement, pre-planning, we tend to talk about finances, right? You got to make sure you have got a good financial plan. But what are you going to do about all the stuff you saw for that whole career? And what are you going to do about purpose? What are you going to do about your identity and all those kinds of things? So there's just a lot of stuff. I know that's a lot more than an introduction, Patrick, and I don't know if you want to ask me some more questions now, but in case you can't tell, I care. We do this stuff every day, all the time. Feel really grateful that we get to serve. And by the way, I'll just mention the population that we serve. Our definition of first responder, like I said, it's military folks who've come on into public safety. It's every kind of dispatch. It's corrections. It's every kind of law enforcement, local, county, state, federal. It's every kind of fire. We've treated actually a number of assistant district attorneys who are prosecuting gang and sex stuff because of what they get exposed to. We've had some crime scene analysts come through. And then we'll take some trauma medical folks. We'll take level 1 trauma, ER nurses and physicians and some of the techs. We've done some oncology and some NICU and some ICU along the way. So it's kind of everybody running into trauma or living in the middle of it, who always know how to put on a brave face and take care of everybody else, but sometimes stuff bubbles up and they don't know quite what to do with themselves. So that's kind of who we take care of. So there's that.
That was great. I'm going to bounce to a question for a minute. And one of the things that I found working, traveling and doing conferences and working with lots of other groups that are in the same space treating first responders, as far as I know, we're the only one in the nation that treats only first responders, not a segment of a program where there's a general population and they treat first responders. So after I ask Janet's question, if we have time, I'd like you to speak just a little bit about why you think the program is successful. And I have some thoughts on that too, if we have time. Janet, go ahead.
Thanks. I just want to say what an honor to hear you. This has been my journey. And in 1992, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. I knew it was in my body. I knew it was my job. It was a naturopathic college that diagnosed me, and they said they figured I'd had it for about 10 years. My husband had a heart attack at 43. He was a police officer. Totally stressed. We'd been transferred to Toronto from Vancouver. He was doing computer stuff, lost everything. Came home, would work till 1 a.m, get a couple hours sleep, go to work, come back and do the same. Nobody addressed any of that. In 2003, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress. I thought because of a car accident, so I didn't go through my RCMP doctors or psychologist, but it took 2 tries to find a psychologist that would work, that I could work with.
Right.
The first one, I would not give anybody any money to pay her to work with her. So what you're doing, like, it's really emotional because this is the first time I've heard a psychologist really understand why we won't talk to somebody else, why we are so, like, we had to do this as a dispatcher. We didn't see it, but our minds created it.
Right.
Our minds created that scene. Our minds and our officers that we were close to committing suicide, we all felt that, but nobody addressed us as going through that. So I want to say thank you. I'd love to be in your team of working with you. I don't work with trauma. I think the gap that's there is there's nobody that helps you move forward after you've worked with that psychologist. That's what I found. And that was my journey to find that. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate your kind words. You know, one of the things that we should know about dispatchers is, you know, we know that when somebody doesn't have all of their senses, the other senses become hypersensitized. And if you think about the analogy to dispatch never sees anything. So that means that what they hear, you know, how they feel, just everything else gets enhanced. And so in many ways, I liken dispatch to kind of someone who, like, we've all read a really good book, and then somebody went and made a movie of the book, and you went and saw the movie, and you thought the movie was horrible because you would have had a much better movie than that because of everything it created in your head. And that's what a dispatcher's like. It's like they create the whole scene in their head. And sometimes it's really big and it's really bad. And, you know, our organization we have treatment, and treatment is a very reactive approach, you know, so when things are really bad, we're there for you. But we also get really excited about the proactive side of things. And that is, how do we work with agencies and departments to build a system that says, let's bleed this stuff off as we go along. Let's normalize behavioral health. Let's work on stuff now so that we doesn't have to end up in a treatment program. Because if you could do stuff earlier in the process, you could talk some stuff through and let it go. You don't have to let it all build up over years and years, or have people feel like they don't understand, or all that kind of stuff. Also, what you said is real important, and that is, we have a very strong view that says that, you know, I may understand a lot about what you guys do, but I'm still an invited guest in your home. And I always need to remember that. And so when I do the things I do, I always bring public safety with me, and actually they bring me with them. So when Patrick and I go somewhere, Patrick's the expert. He's the subject matter expert. And when Patrick comes in and says, hey, this is Dr. O, you can trust him, that's what opens doors, because I can't come in like some mental health guy who thinks I know everything about public safety, because I don't. I've never sat in your car. You know, I've never sat at your desk. And so I always need to be very respectful of that. And I think that's part of the secret to our success, is everything we do is kind of co-led by public safety professionals and mental health professionals. So I really want to make sure that people understand that my view of mental health providers helping public safety is to be partners, and never to come in and say, we know how to take care of you and make you better. Because it's all about what you guys know to do. That's more important. So Patrick, you said you had a question.
Yeah, and I'd like to, Janet actually kind of went there. So Janet, one thing that we do I give myself too much credit. One thing that our team does, and they're very good at First Responder Wellness, is while a person, when they first show up for treatment, they try to align them and see if they already have a clinician where they live. A culturally competent clinician, because like you said, most are not. And one of the things that's happening in the industry now is people check a box saying that they are, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're qualified to sit there in that space with a person and hear their story without having their own trauma and difficulty that they absorb from the story. And so Dr. Odom and a friend of mine have developed a vetting process that's pretty intensive to vet clinicians and make sure they're culturally competent. And our team works with them to make sure that as they get closer to a discharge date, that they have a comprehensive outpatient program that involves that clinician, so that there's a smooth handoff. And within a week or so after they're discharged, they already have their first appointment back home with their culturally competent clinician scheduled. And so that kind of speaks to my question, Dr. Odom, which was, that's one reason I think that we're more successful. What are some reasons that you feel the program is so successful? I, after looking at all these other programs, feel it's the best in the nation from my perspective. And that's one of the reasons that I reached out to you to work for you, because I didn't want to work for somebody that wasn't treating my brothers and sisters the way that I would if I was doing it. So what do you think leads to that success and propels you to where you are?
That's kind of you to say. And I don't know how objective everyone's going to think he is since he works for the organization, but I appreciate that. I think from my perspective, what makes us potentially a little different are a couple of factors. I think, let's just be honest, part of it is luck. We were in the right place at the right time. I've been doing this for first responders for about 14 years now. And I will have to say that the pandemic really pushed everybody over a ledge, and the whole world is sick and tired. And I think that really pushed wellness into the forefront for public safety, because it was hard to say it didn't bother you and it didn't affect you. Now, it's been affecting people for a long, long time, but you guys all suffered in silence. Now it's kind of like it's a little more okay to say something's going on, and we happen to be a place that had been built and was already ready to go. I think, after the luck piece, it's the fact that so many different agencies have tried our program. And it's kind of funny, when we first started, people would send us one person and then they'd watch them for almost a year to see if they did okay. And then the floodgates open. And so slowly, carefully over time, one patient at a time, we've built our credibility, because people have really good outcomes. They go back, they get back to work. Their trauma is resolved, or they're working on it, on an ongoing basis, and it's much more manageable. And I think that, ultimately, just kind of from down underneath it, we have a slightly different model. And what that really means is, like I mentioned at the beginning, I kind of grew up treating nurses and physicians. And what that means is I was treating professionals. And when you work with professionals, it's a little bit different than working with the general population, because these are people who take pride in who they are and what they do. And public safety is exactly the same. There's so much pride and so much respect for self and how we do the things that we do, that when you throw people into a treatment program and you start treating everybody the same, like they're all a bunch of civilians, and you need to tell them when to get up, and you need to tell them when they can have their phone, and you need to tell them all these things, it doesn't go very well. And so we have an approach that says, we respect you. We absolutely respect you. We're going to treat you like adults. You're going to do things the way we request that you do them. And if it's getting in the way of your treatment, we're going to talk about it. And sometimes if you don't do things the right way, then you kind of lose the privilege, but we're going to assume you own that privilege from the beginning. And so I think being treated that way from the very beginning feels better and right. Like, why are you treating me like a kid? I'm a police officer. Are you kidding me? Or all those kinds of things. So I think we take a pretty mature approach to treatment. We also have a treatment program that has a continuum of care. People come into our programs at the highest level of care, which is sometimes they need detox, sometimes they just need psychiatric stabilization. That's 24/7 care with nurses and physicians and psychologists and therapists and all the whole alphabet soup after everybody's last name, which is great. But then we transition into a lower level of care where they move living locations, but they come to us as more of an outpatient. They're still living with us, but they're with us for 6 or 8 hours a day. And after hours, they get to go back to their place. They get to cook their food. They get to hang out with their peers. They get to go hear sirens. They get to walk by a homeless person, potentially. They get to walk by a bar. And we like those triggering experiences, because we want them to be okay by the time they get home. Oftentimes when you find treatment programs that are in a beautiful place, but it's really safe the whole time, when they pop out at the end, it's almost like they have to start over again. Like, oh my God, I'm back in the real world. I'm not sure how to handle that. We like to get people handling things before they're back to work or back home again, because then they've actually kind of been through the fire and had the stress challenges that we want them to have. So I think those reasons, and the fact that we've now worked with probably 700 agencies across the country. We see a lot about how people take really good care of their folks and how some people don't take good care of their folks yet. And so all those things kind of factor into being able to create a place that I think is pretty special and different. Because again, we only work with public safety. And so we learn a lot that way. There's a long answer to a short question.
Great. What's the future for first responder wellness? Because as many people as you've treated, I don't see the demand lessening at all, especially with the way things are happening in the world. So what do you
Sure.
see 3,
Yes.
5, 10 years from now?
Yeah, so I think what's happening and what I hope is happening, let me go back a step. I think a lot of reactive stuff is still happening. You know, people have got 5, 10, 15, 20 years of this stuff, 25 years of this stuff, all compacted, and it's coming out. So I think that's going to be a need for a good long time. I think what's happening that I am excited about and encouraged by is, again, this what we call proactive approach to wellness. And that's the idea that we come in at the academy, we start training behavioral health and normalizing it. We start training family members, which I think are completely lost in the mix here. Like everybody who came from a first responder family can give you story after story after story of, oh my God, I didn't even realize it, but I signed a contract where I came in second on everything for the rest of our lives. And they don't know how to talk to me when they get home. And yet there's all kinds of stuff that we have to take care of. And next thing you know, we're doing parallel lives. And then the kids have a certain way of looking at things. And so if you could train or teach families how to know what's coming and how to transition home every day and just all kinds of little things, that would really help. If we normalize behavioral health and that it's really a normal response to abnormal situations, and you can talk your way through that stuff rather than letting it pile up, that would be great. And then what I'm really excited about is, I think it's kind of interesting that I say it this way, but I feel like at this point we've been invited to sit at the big kids table. And so we're getting to be a part of things. We've been asked to be on a big California statewide task force for fire, developing public safety wellness. I just got to have a really amazing training with, I think it was 36 police chiefs, 2 sheriffs, and 2 district attorneys on legitimate leadership and training wellness into everything they do. I get to speak next week at the International Association of Chiefs of Police on how the job affects families and children of first responders. And so we're beginning to have a voice that says we've got to do something about this because it's killing people. You know, and it would be nice if we didn't have to wait until suicide and all those other things are what's taking people out. But, you know, public safety tends to be a little on the reactive side, like we're ready, but we don't do anything until it actually happens. And so I think all those kinds of things, as far as our treatment programming goes, you know, we certainly look at putting another center somewhere else across the country. We also look at doing stuff that's kind of on an outpatient basis. We actually sign a lot of contracts with agencies to take care of their short-term counseling, their crisis response, and their training. And I feel like the more we put energy into that, the less we have need eventually for the treatment center, which would be fine by me. So there's just so many things happening on so many levels. You already mentioned it, and it's kind of what I think is the biggest problem. The biggest problem is people are listening, and we're becoming victims of our own success by saying, please go to counseling. Everyone's beginning to go to counseling, and there's not enough good culturally competent counselors out there. So one of our biggest missions, and we're about to launch a first responder kind of training academy for mental health clinicians, where they come through, they train up on everything we believe they need to know to be competent with first responders and their families. And then we're taking that out to different places in the country because we're trying to help people build their own wherever they live. It can't be us everywhere, but we would like to have a hand in kind of normalizing or kind of making the training be consistent everywhere so that when people come across first responders and their families, they know what to do. Because, you know, kind of what Janet said, first of all, it's a skeptical bunch, and mental health, again, is a weird relationship. And so if you're going to walk into the therapist's office, you're almost looking for it to go wrong, not to go right. And so the first thing they do that's wrong, it's like, see, I was right. These people don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to help us. So it's never going to work. So we have to make sure that first encounter, you know, what is it? You only get to make a first impression once. It has to be a good one. And so we're really focused on building out culturally competent networks around the country. Fortunately for us, because of some of the bigger contracts we have that are kind of all over the country, we have a pretty big network of 1,600 or so clinicians around who are really good at what they do. And I see it growing everywhere. It's really exciting. So I think the future is just to continue to spread the word on the preventative side more and more and more. And we'll have the reactive answer when you need it. It's kind of funny. One of my partners, I was talking about this a lot. My partner said, I understand the proactive, but if you keep doing this, aren't you going to kind of put the treatment center out of business? And I said, I hate to tell you this, but as long as there's parents, there'll be a need for a treatment center. It's going to be okay. Like, that's kind of how it works. So there you go.
I think Janet has a question. Go ahead, Janet.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I used to say every day, like some people would say, oh, it's quiet at work. And I'd say, you know what? If that phone doesn't ring, I'm a happy camper. And I'd love to be put out of business. So keep
Right.
working at that. But what I wanted to address, I like where you're going. I was a spouse for 10 years before I joined. So I can speak to both sides of that, to the vicarious trauma that's brought home,
Right.
and to the other side of it, that when my husband called me at work and says, you know, it's lonely at home when nobody's here. Or did you put in for overtime because you're coming home late? And I just put my hand on my hip and I said, voluntary overtime. Do you know how many times I heard that? So, you know, raising kids to the fact that our son at 6 shoplifted. Now, for a law enforcement family, that's devastating. So I sent him to a child psychologist, and the child psychologist, for one thing, my kids are a year apart to the day, and I made them matching sweaters, and they're a boy and a girl. I got reprimanded by the psychologist for that. But also what he said to my husband, you're a father first, not a policeman, so quit interrogating your son.
Right. That was a good psychologist.
Anyways, that's my
Yeah.
2 cents.
Yeah, you know, I think that you bring up a really good point. We now have, you know, our treatment program is in Southern California, so it's a pretty big area. We got a ton of public safety down here. Some of the bigger agencies lately in the past year or so have put together family member peer support programs, which I think are absolutely amazing. And so, you know, we have peer support on the agency side where responders and fire and you know, take care of each other and they talk through problems and then they know how to direct to resources, but the families were kind of left out. And so we see more and more families are getting in the game to say, you know what, we got to take care of each other and ourselves because it's a special life that we live and we all are respectful of it. But there's something about that thin blue line and that thick red line that keeps us all isolated. And we all think we're the only ones thinking this stuff and feeling this stuff. And that's just not true. You know, I didn't mention about one of the other key ingredients to our treatment program is we have a family program. Every 5 weeks, family members come in, they're with us for 3 or 4 days. They get the education. They do some group stuff with other family members. They do group stuff with their patient. And every single one of them was like, I thought I was the only one. I thought that I had to keep my mouth shut about all this because you don't talk about this stuff, but this is a hard life and no one wants it to be. And we all still love and respect the career itself, but boy, does it take it out of us. And like you said, there's a lot of lonely nights. There's a lot of doing things on your own. There's a lot of parallel play. And then one day we kind of wake up and look around and go, wait, I don't even feel connected anymore. I don't know how that happened. It's like, well, it happened 1 degree at a time over 10 or 15 years. That's just what happens. And so we need to train that better. We do this thing called Families on the Front Line. It's a big training for family members. It's for spouses, you know, for the responder and their spouse. And every single time I do it, it's always inevitable. One of the long married responder spouses comes up to me, always with a tear, and they say, "I don't know how to feel. I'm really excited you're doing this for the young people, but I'm really pissed off that they never did it for us." It's like, why did I have to wait 25 years to figure out I should have done it different and better? And so, you know, we have to take care of everybody who's feeling it now, but I think we need to build the systems that prevent it from happening in the future, because there's so many things that are pointing a negative finger at coming into law enforcement in particular, that we have to learn how to take care of people because we want them to stick it out for the career. And we have to understand that it is a different career. And then we have to think on the military side, like, how do we have people come out of the military and into public safety and feel like they're taken care of too? And in some ways, there's a brotherhood, sisterhood that works really well, but other times it also feels like we're a little different. And so how do we make that integrate better so that we feel the support all the way through? And so there's just a lot of ways that we need to start taking care of the brain. I think we also need to be careful that we're not calling it mental health and mental illness. that we're just calling it brain health. You know, if you take care of your brain, you take care of everything. And so what is it to take care of your brain? Well, it's to be very preventative and proactive, just like we tell you to train your body so that you can handle a foot pursuit. You got to learn how to run so you can do a foot pursuit. Well, if you're going to take care of your brain for the long haul, what should you be doing for that too? So I think if we just flip the script on how we talk about this, we're going to get a lot further. And there's some concern about the generation coming into the workforce now, the Generation Z kids, and you hear all kinds of sly comments like, they come to work 5 days in a row and they want a badge for that, or they've been at the job 6 months and now they want a promotion, and they cry if you reprimand them and you tell them to do something and they say why. And there's a lot to complain about, but there's some stuff that's good too. They are willing to talk about their emotions. They are willing to work hard for work-life balance. And maybe if we could put those together into public safety, we could figure out how to build a stronger, more resilient crew going down the road. So I think we have to be careful that we're not black and white about the whole thing, but it is a different world. And yet we need public safety to function and do what it needs to do because the world's not getting any safer. And so there's a lot that goes into the equation to how we take care of each other and how you guys take care of yourselves as we walk into the future.
Thank you. Do you have time for 2 more questions, Dr. Odom, to round out the hour, or do you need to get going?
Well, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, your question made one of them, so I'm going to do 3. So it's okay.
Okay. Sarah?
Okay, I'll be quick. First off, I just want to say I really appreciate your humility. I appreciate your respect for our protectors. It just seems like it's a standout. I love what you said about the brain health, really focusing in on brain health versus, mental illness. What you exude is, to me, it's just healthy and it's not so rigid, which can come into this arena of addiction. So I just want to applaud the healthiness all around that. So well thought out. That's how it hits me. So first off, I just want to thank you for that. 2 things that hit me. It was really interesting how you said there's a window like 30 to 45 days after a trauma that we really need to process that trauma within that window.
Right.
That is really interesting. I don't think I've ever really heard that. And it's a great goal. It's, clarity, like, what, when something happens, make sure that is processed, the first 30 to 45 days, so it doesn't haunt you later on. Like you said, that the people coming in for treatment, just waited a long time, or just maybe felt like they didn't have the option or whatever, but that's just great. That's a great nugget. So I want to thank you for that. And the suicide, you talked about up to 5 years, like before retirement. I mean, that 5-year gap before retirement, that's a high suicide window.
Mhm.
That was very interesting to me too. So it sounds like in our first responder world, they don't have that twilight work situation that military can have. Like there's people who, SEALs maybe have a traumatic brain injury from their deployments, and they can go into a work phase before retirement, which is the twilight job, or they may just, stay stateside and train. So
Right. Yeah, so just to kind of answer both of your questions, I'll go backwards. So about the higher rate 5 years before retirement, some of it's speculation. We don't really have all the data to tell you exactly why, but I think some people are looking past the end of the line, seeing that there's not a lot left for them, that they don't really have a lot of good stuff to look forward to, or again, this is a brain that's been affected by 20, 25 years of stuff. And that stuff tends to make you a little more cynical, and it tends to make you a little more irritable. It tends to make the world a little smaller, and you can't see that there's a lot that's really going to be better for you after this. And so that's often what happens. And plus the fact that oftentimes, people are trying to dissociate their whole career. They're trying not to think about the things you don't want to think about. And at first, a lot of people have pretty healthy coping mechanisms. They have a hobby, they woodwork, they mountain bike, they go on runs and hikes, they do all kinds of stuff, but gradually over time you get tired and you don't have a lot of time. And so you find the quick fixes, and the quick fixes are things like having some beers, it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And if you keep doing that as your coping skill, then the next thing you know, that's your go-to. And at some point that turns on you. And that's not a great answer. And so a lot of times the folks are piling up towards the end of the career and they've stopped using all their other coping skills. They're kind of down to the one or two, and those really aren't good for you. And so then that seems like a more viable path too, because I just don't see much good for me. Back to the first question, which is about kind of bleeding it off in 30 to 45 days. We kind of knew this all along. We didn't really call it what it was because we've had these things called critical incident debriefs. And what that means is that after a tough call or a tough scene, we try to call everyone together and kind of process through that. The trouble with critical incident debriefs is oftentimes they're optional. And so a lot of times whoever is in charge on scene, the sergeant on scene, the captain on scene will say, hey guys, that was a tough pediatric death call. Do we need to do a debrief? And it's really kind of a dare you to say, oh yeah, I think we should, because no one will say yes to that. Are you kidding? I'm fine. And so what we're working with departments on is let's make debriefs mandatory for certain categories of calls. Like you don't get an option to decide you want it or not, and you don't have to talk, but we're going to process through things, and we're going to do it within a week or two of the bad scene, the bad situation. And that might be good for a lot of people. And then a few people might say, you know what, I want to go see the mental health person after that. And that's fine. So we've been doing it. We just didn't do it right. And now I think we're learning how to do it better. And those are all called acute stress incidents. And anybody seeing anything like that, it bothers you on some level, but you tend to think because I'm a cop, because I'm a paramedic, because I'm a firefighter, I'm supposed to be used to this stuff. And it's usually the ones that personalize, like when you go on a pediatric, when it happens to accidentally look like your kid, all of a sudden you're in trouble. And you try not to let it be like that, but that's what happens. And so we just need to know that there's a mechanism to be healthy about it. It's like going to the physical therapist and rolling it out and doing some work so it doesn't become a worse injury. We just need to do that with your head. So all that kind of stuff.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Looks like you have your hand up, Paul.
Oh, good.
I have a couple of thoughts. One is that when somebody retires, when they take off their uniform, I don't care whether it's military, first responder, whatever it is, but the camaraderie kind of dissipates.
Right.
And what I found for myself was identifying a purpose for which I continue on. And I'm just shy of 80 years old, and I have no plans of departing the planet anytime soon.
That's good to hear.
Well, but I guess one of the questions I have is, who funds your operation? Are you a nonprofit, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so we're a for-profit organization. On the treatment side, it's covered by almost everyone's insurance. Almost 98% of everything is covered by your Blue Cross, your Blue Shield, your Cigna, your workers' comp, all that kind of stuff. And we're in network with everybody, so that there's no out-of-network kind of craziness going on like that. The stuff that we do for agencies, those are usually direct contracts with the police department, the fire department, the city, the county, the federal government. So, we kind of work in government world all the time. That's who our contracts are with directly. And then, we kind of say we never let finances get in the way. We have so many people who are on it. Like, you have to pay your deductible, you have to pay your coinsurance, but we have about $1,025 a month payment plans going. Who cares? It doesn't really matter. We just take care of people. So yeah. And to your point about retirement, we actually have a really cool course. It's called Retire Well. And it talks about exactly what you're talking about. It's like, what do you do about the kind of the badge identity when that goes away? What do you do about purpose? What do you do about civilian life and finding new friends? And what do you do about the fact that, there's been a lifetime of all this work that I crossed the line, and as long as I was busy, I didn't have to think much about it. But again, it starts to percolate up. And so we try to help agencies begin to help train their folks before retirement, so that by the time retirement comes, they kind of have a good plan. So you had to figure it out on your own. We like to help people figure it out a little bit more as a group. So that's how we're working on that too.
Thank you very much. The second thought that I have is that, and I was a police officer back in the 70s and 80s.
Right.
And the assumption was that if you went to command staff because you needed some help for trauma or whatever it was, and Lord knows we've all seen some really nasty situations, but that was viewed as a weakness when you asked for help. And there's a stigma that was attached to it.
I think we lost him.
Yeah, I think he froze.
Well, Dr. Odom, you have been very gracious with your time. I really appreciate it. We'll rescue Paul in a few minutes. But he's right. Part of what has held us back and still holds us back, I still encounter this, is the stigma about suck it up, buttercup. But Dr. Odom, we gauge when we do a critical incident stress debriefing after a major event together, we gauge the success by whether or not the people stick around and continue to have conversation. And I think that's the perfect opportunity for us to stop the recording and let Dr. Odom make his exit, and I'll be happy to stick around with you guys and field any questions that you have. But as long as this conversation continues, I think we were successful. So thank you, Dr. Odom, for your time. I appreciate it. And I'll see you in a couple of weeks, I guess, in Chelan. Yeah. I just got a few emails while we were talking about people who want to sign up at the last minute. So we'll see what happens.
Good.